Hello everyone, welcome back to another art time lapse. Today I am doing a Studio Ghibli inspired fan art in combination with First Nations art that I've been affected by with my recent trip visiting some of the islands on the west coast of British Columbia. Now, when I first started this piece, I was really torn. Like, is it okay for me to do like kind of First Nation style artwork, seeing that like I'm not First Nation myself? But thinking back, like with my Chinese heritage, like I'm not offended when people paint art in the style of Chinese artwork. I think it's just like people exploring different styles of artwork. As long as it's not meant to be like offensive by any means, like I think it's okay. So I thought I'll try it out. So being from the West Coast and like we have a lot of exposure to the First Nation artwork, either through our kind of local community areas and also like in school as well. So I thought I'll integrate that into my love for Studio Ghibli and their fan art. I hope you will enjoy it. It was like a piece that I was pondering for the longest time because of the political implications and the sensitivity of that, and like it hopefully will come out nicely, and everyone will enjoy the art process. So here I'm using Acryla Gouache, which is when acrylics and watercolor have like a baby, and it's like an ultra pigmented kind of medium, and I really like that. And when you mix it with water, it has this kind of like diluted watercolor effect. You can see for my pieces, I tend not to outline my piece with pencil or like color pencils. I just kind of go put paint to paper and just dabble in and hope for the best. Of course, I still get a lot of pressure when I'm filming myself, whether I'm doing this right and people get to see it, but I'm trying my best not to be too self-conscious of it. I'm using a very narrow brush that I picked up at my local art store. I think it is a number 2 or maybe even like a half 1/2 kind of like half-inch brush. Really like brushes that are a little bit shorter because like I don't have big hands, and when I like to do details, I don't like to have a really long extension of the brush that runs behind, so I prefer something shorter. Here I'm just gonna do hummingbirds. You can see I initially started off with the foliage just to kind of state out where the background is, and then I'm painting in the hummingbirds and the birds on the side. I'm focusing on one color at a time, starting off with like a cobalt blue, mixing it with a little bit of plum color as well. Later on, when those sections dry, then I will focus on the next color. So it's almost like when you're screening, like printing screens on t-shirts and like accessories, you only do one color at a time. And that's like the idea behind it, because I'm thinking like I don't want the colors to easily mix into each other, the reds and the blues. But I know that acrylic wash does dry quickly, so I don't want to keep like washing my brush and going back and forth. It's also very challenging for me, so I like to challenge myself with each art piece and hopefully learn a new technique. And for this, I just have to have really good spatial conception of like, okay, where is the red detail is gonna go, how much room do I need to leave for it, and so forth. So I thought this was like a really interesting piece for me to challenge myself with, just working on one screen, one color at a time. Luckily for me, this particular piece is really focused on the darker blue colors rather than the red, so I can mostly do most of the painting done for the just using the blue and just add red for detail. For a simple piece like this, I am painting on Stone Hedge watercolor block on hot press paper, and this is a 5 by 7 inch piece of paper, and I like little pieces of drawing like these because I can usually finish it in several sittings. Some of the larger pieces that are beyond 11 by 14 usually takes me several weeks and months, and sometimes I get bored of that. And I really like the adrenaline of like almost like finishing a piece in like 1 or 2 sitting, because like That way, like, you can really see your target. You can see that, like, okay, I have this much done, and I think that will take like maybe another hour and I'll be done. The unfortunate thing about painting on like smaller pieces of paper is that if you were to make it into a print, a lot of times people prefer larger prints when they're framing it, so it's harder to make them into prints in the future. They're probably closer to postcard size, I would say. So here you can see I finished most of the foliage and the hummingbird, and now I'm adding TOTORO to the mix. And I really love TOTORO. I feel like it's such a classic within Japanese anime. So I decided to have him hover. And I think that TOTORO is such a whimsical, such a curious character. Having TOTORO in the mix is kind of like TOTORO enjoying like the West Coast, symbolizing like discovery, curiosity for the arts that is surrounding us here on the West Coast in Canada. Here I'm just adding on some darker colors for some of the foliage. If you follow some of my videos, you know I mentioned that for acrylic gouache, the darker colors tend to dry a little bit lighter. So sometimes I find that after it dries, it's still a little bit on the lighter side. So I have to kind of go over it again with another layer. And the great thing about acrylic gouache is that you can kind of layer things on top of each other, and you don't have to worry about like it remixing and not working out. Using a very fine brush is actually very therapeutic. I would say very therapeutic in adding the details and just enjoying the process. The great thing about gouache as well is that it's really lend itself well to other mixed medias. So I can go back and use like a jelly roll from Sakura, for example, to add in details, or like other mixed media as well, mixing it in or like gluing it on, and like just lends itself really well. Here I'm just also using my Sakura jelly roll, as you can see, just to demonstrate for some of the details for that I didn't do so well with my brush stroke. I can always go back and use this white color to kind of fix up some of the mistakes, and I find it's a little bit easier to maneuver as opposed to gouache because it's a little bit water based and it can always like spread a little bit if you have too much water on your brush. So I find that like a archival jelly ink pen is really helpful, and that's one of my trade secrets. As you'll notice, I've shown repeatedly on how I use this type of medium with my gouache in my numerous videos. So here I'll give you a closer look at how it turns out, but this is the process of how I use it. And I use the same jelly roll to add details for the TOTORO character as well. I've also added these two tiny small TOTORO on the upper branches of the plant, which you saw earlier, but once I do a panoramic view of the piece, you'll have a better look at it. So overall, I'm pretty impressed and pretty happy of how it turned out. I hope you enjoy this process and seeing this fusion of these two forms of art together. And here's the two little TOTOROs on the top. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me on this art time lapse of this piece of a Studio Ghibli TOTORO fan art fusion with kind of West Coast First Nation art style and theme. I feel like it actually worked out much nicer. I don't plan on making prints of this, but I just think it's so fun to paint. And here is the final piece. Curious about nature. Well, that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me on this art time lapse, and hopefully I'll see you next time in another video. Take care and stay creative, everyone. Bye for now.